Sir, that boy lives in my house. Those 7 words didn't just interrupt the evening. They froze it. The laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft classical music floating through the ballroom. Everything seemed to stop at once. Billionaire real estate tycoon Daniel Whitmore had heard many shocking things in his life. Billion-dollar lawsuits, corporate betrayals, sudden market crashes, but nothing had ever made his heart drop the way those words did. He was standing beneath a massive crystal chandelier inside the Grand Hall of Westbridge Academy, the most prestigious private school in the state. The charity fundraiser was his event. His donation had funded the new science wing. His name was engraved in gold near the entrance. Cameras flashed as reporters waited for him to step onto the stage. Investors surrounded him. The mayor had just shaken his hand moments earlier. Everything was perfect, controlled, powerful, until that trembling voice came from behind him. Sir, that boy lives in my house. Daniel turned slowly, the confident smile still half-formed on his face. Standing, there was Mrs. Eleanor Harper, a retired schoolteacher who had dedicated over 30 years to the academy. Her gray hair was neatly tied back, her posture slightly bent with age, but tonight her eyes were steady. Serious, not respectful, not impressed, just serious. She wasn't smiling like everyone else. She wasn't holding a champagne glass. She was pointing. Daniel followed her finger. Near the refreshment table stood a teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17. He wore a simple black suit that didn't quite fit perfectly, like it had been borrowed for the occasion. He wasn't laughing with the other students. He stood quietly, observing the room, watching. There was something different about him, something familiar. Daniel narrowed his eyes slightly. The boy had dark hair, sharp features, broad shoulders for his age, and then it hit him. The eyes, deep blue, the exact shade Daniel saw every morning in his bathroom mirror. A strange feeling crept into his chest. What do you mean? Daniel asked, lowering his voice, trying to maintain composure as a photographer passed nearby. Mrs. Harper swallowed. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. That boy, his name is Ethan, she said. He lives in my house. Daniel blinked, confused. I don't understand. Mrs. Harper glanced toward the stage where the principal was preparing to announce Daniel's speech. Time was running out. There's something you need to know about him, she continued softly. Something that should have been told to you a long time ago. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. He had built an empire by reading people, by sensing danger before it arrived. And right now, something was coming. The music in the ballroom faded into background noise. The applause from another table sounded distant, almost underwater. Ethan looked up at that exact moment. Their eyes met across the room, and in that brief second, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not pressure, recognition, the kind that doesn't need words, the kind that shakes something deep inside your soul. Mrs. Harper stepped closer and whispered, 16 years ago, his mother made a choice. And tonight, you need to know the truth. Daniel's perfect evening, the speeches, the headlines, the applause, suddenly felt meaningless. Because whatever secret was about to be revealed had the power to destroy everything he thought he knew about his life. And for the first time in years, Daniel Whitmore felt completely unprepared. Daniel studied the boy carefully. At first, he told himself it was coincidence. Dark hair, sharp jawline, confident posture. But then he saw it clearly. The eyes, deep blue, calm, observant, intense. The same eyes Daniel saw every single morning staring back at him in the mirror of his penthouse bathroom. His heart began to race, a slow, heavy pounding in his chest. No, he whispered under his breath. That's impossible. Mrs. Harper stood beside him, her expression filled with a mixture of sadness and long-held burden. She had carried this truth for years. 16 years ago, she began softly, a young woman came to me. Daniel's throat tightened. She was sick, very sick, but she was strong, stronger than she looked. Daniel's vision blurred slightly as memories began forcing their way back into his mind. 16 years ago, before the skyscrapers, before the private jets, before the interviews and magazine covers. back when Daniel was just an ambitious young businessman trying to prove himself to the world. That was when he met Clara Bennett. Clara wasn't impressed by money. She wasn't dazzled by ambition. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and grounded. She challenged him, questioned him, balanced him. For a short time, she was the only person who saw Daniel, not the businessman, just the man. But when opportunity knocked, Daniel chose ambition. A major investor offered him a life-changing deal in another city. The condition? Total focus, no distractions. And Clara became a distraction. He convinced himself it was temporary. He told her he needed space. He promised to return when things were stable. But success came faster than expected. Calls became fewer. Messages became shorter. Eventually, silence replaced everything. He told himself she understood. He never checked. He never looked back. Until now. Mrs. Harper's voice trembled slightly as she continued. Clara found out she was pregnant shortly after you left. Daniel felt like the air had been pulled from his lungs. She tried to reach you, Mrs. Harper said gently. But your office said you were unavailable. Traveling. Busy. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. He remembered instructing his assistant years ago. No personal calls. Only business. She didn't want to trap you, Mrs. Harper said. She said you were building something important. She didn't want to stand in the way of your future. Daniel felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt. Clara's illness got worse during the pregnancy. Mrs. Harper continued. Before she passed, she asked me to promise something. Daniel's voice came out barely above a whisper. What? She asked me to raise her baby if she couldn't, and to only tell you if the right time ever came. A wave of guilt crashed over him. Clara had faced everything alone. The fear, the sickness, the birth. And he had been in a boardroom somewhere, celebrating profits. Mrs. Harper's eyes softened. She passed away 3 months after Ethan was born. The words echoed like a distant explosion. Daniel's entire world went silent. The music from the ballroom was gone. The laughter faded. All he could hear was the sound of his own breathing. You're saying, he struggled, gripping the edge of a nearby table for balance. That boy is mine? Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. Yes. Her voice was firm now. Yes, Daniel. She paused before saying the words that shattered him completely. Ethan Whitmore is your son. The ground beneath Daniel's expensive Italian shoes suddenly felt unstable. For years, he believed he had sacrificed love to build an empire. But the truth was far worse. He hadn't just sacrificed love. He had abandoned it. And across the room, completely unaware of the storm around him, his son stood quietly, carrying 16 years of a story Daniel never knew existed. Daniel refused to believe it without proof. Hope was dangerous. Assumptions were worse. He had spent his entire career trusting data, contracts, signatures, not emotions. And this was too big to accept on someone else's word. The next morning, before the city had fully awakened, Daniel arranged a private DNA test through one of the most discreet medical firms in the country. No publicity, no records that could leak. Ethan had no idea who Daniel truly was. To him, Daniel was simply one of the wealthy donors from the charity event. Another rich man in a tailored suit shaking hands and smiling for cameras. When Daniel approached Mrs. Harper with a request, she hesitated only briefly before agreeing. If this gives you certainty, she said quietly, then do it. The sample collection was simple, quick, clinical, but the waiting was torture. 3 days, 72 hours that felt like 72 years. Daniel couldn't focus on meetings. He canceled appointments. He ignored investor calls. Numbers on screens meant nothing now. At night, he sat alone in his glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline, staring down at the traffic below. 16 years. 16 birthdays he had missed. 16 school years. First steps. First words. First day of school. All gone. On the third morning, the envelope arrived. Plain. Sealed. Heavy. Daniel held it in his hand for several seconds before opening it. For the first time in his life, he was afraid of information. He slowly unfolded the report. His eyes scanned the page. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. The numbers blurred. There was no doubt. No debate. No escape. Ethan was his son. Daniel lowered himself into his leather chair, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. He had built skyscrapers that touched the clouds. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without flinching. He had crushed competitors twice his size. But he had missed the most important contract of his life, being a father. And there was no legal team in the world that could rewrite those lost years. Within the hour, Daniel was in his car, driving himself, something he rarely did. He didn't want a driver. He didn't want witnesses. Mrs. Harper's house was small and modest, tucked into a quiet neighborhood far from the polished towers Daniel owned downtown. He parked slowly. For a moment, he just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Then he stepped out. Each step toward the front door felt heavier than the last. He knocked. Seconds later, the door opened. Ethan stood there. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The same posture, the same eyes. But those eyes held something Daniel had never seen in his own reflection. Distance. "Can I help you, sir?" Ethan asked politely, unaware of the earthquake about to hit his world. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His throat tightened. His chest felt hollow. He had given speeches to thousands without notes. But now, 2 words felt impossible. Finally, barely above a whisper, he said, "I'm your father." Silence. Ethan blinked once. Twice. At first, there was only confusion. His eyebrows pulled together slightly. "My father." The word sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Then realization began to form. And with it, anger. A slow, controlled anger that was far more painful than shouting. "My father," Ethan repeated, his voice growing sharper. "My father never came." Daniel felt the words land like blows. "My father never called." Another hit. "My father never cared." Each sentence stripped away Daniel's defenses. Because Ethan wasn't wrong. There had been no calls, no visites, no letters, only absence. And for the first time in his powerful, unstoppable life, Daniel Whitmore had no argument, only regret. Daniel did what he had always done when faced with a problem. He tried to solve it with money. The next evening, he returned to Mrs. Harper's house, not with cameras, not with lawyers, but with offers. "Ethan," he said carefully, "I can transfer you to the best private academy in the country. Any school you want. I'll set up a trust fund. You'll never have to worry about college, about your future, about anything." Ethan stood quietly, arms folded. Daniel continued, his voice growing more urgent. "I have a house near the coast. It's empty. You and Mrs. Harper could move there. Or I could buy something closer to your school. A bigger place. Safer. Better opportunities." He was speaking fast now, like a man closing a high-stakes deal, because that was the only language he knew. A mansion, a new car, travel, security, a life upgraded overnight. But Ethan didn't look impressed. He didn't look grateful. He looked hurt. "I don't want your money," Ethan said firmly. Daniel stopped talking. The room felt smaller. "I wanted my dad." The sentence was calm, not shouted, not dramatic, but cut deeper than any public scandal ever could. Daniel felt something inside him collapse. Stock crashes had cost him millions. Market failures had tested his strength. But this was different, because this loss couldn't be recovered with strategy. It couldn't be negotiated. 16 years were gone, and no check could buy them back. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but there was nothing he could say, because Ethan was right. He hadn't been there. And before Daniel could figure out how to repair what was broken, the outside world found out. It started with a photograph. A freelance reporter, chasing stories about wealthy donors, had noticed Daniel's black luxury car parked multiple times in the same modest neighborhood. Curiosity turned into investigation. Investigation turned into a headline. Within days, every major business network ran the same story. Billionaire hid secret son for 16 years. The word spread like wildfire. Television panels debated his character. Social media exploded with accusations. Was he irresponsible? Was he dishonest? If he could hide a child, what else was he hiding? Investors panicked. Whitmore Global stock dropped 12% in 2 days. Board members called emergency meetings. Some demanded a public explanation. Others quietly questioned his leadership. Business rivals seized the opportunity. They painted him as unstable, untrustworthy, a man whose personal secrets reflected poor judgment. But the worst damage wasn't happening in the stock market. It was happening inside Daniel. For the first time in his career, he wasn't worried about losing money. He was worried about losing something far more fragile. Any chance of rebuilding trust with his son. Every news report made it look like Daniel had intentionally hidden Ethan. But the truth was more painful. He hadn't hidden his son. He hadn't known. And somehow, that felt even worse. Because ignorance wasn't innocence. It was neglect. Late at night, Daniel stood alone in his penthouse, watching his company's red numbers flash across financial screens. He had built his empire on relentless ambition, on 20-hour workdays, on the belief that success required sacrifice. But now he understood something terrifying. He hadn't just sacrificed sleep, or comfort, or relationships. He had sacrificed the people who mattered most. Clara, Ethan, moments that would never return. And as headlines continued to tear apart his public image, Daniel realized the truth. The empire he spent decades building wasn't being destroyed by scandal. It was being exposed by regret. And for the first time in his powerful life, he felt truly powerless. For weeks, Daniel didn't fight the headlines. He didn't schedule interviews. He didn't release defensive statements written by expensive PR teams. For the first time in his career, he let the world talk. He let the accusations breathe. He let the stock market react. And then, he did something no one expected. He stepped down as CEO of Whitmore Global. The announcement sent shockwaves through the business world. Board members were stunned. Investors called it reckless. Financial analysts debated whether he was collapsing under pressure. But Daniel knew something they didn't. For decades, he had believed money was the ultimate solution. Money built influence. Money built security. Money built empires. But money had not built a relationship with his son. And now, that was the only thing that mattered. In a quiet, simple press release, Daniel said he was shifting his priorities toward personal responsibilities. The media speculated, but they didn't know the real reason. He wasn't losing control. He was choosing what truly deserved it. Within a month, Daniel moved out of his glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city skyline. He bought a modest house just a few streets away from Mrs. Harper's neighborhood. Not a mansion, not a statement property, just a normal home. 2 floors, a small yard, a garage. When reporters asked why, he simply said he wanted a change of environment. But the truth was deeper. He wasn't trying to impress Ethan. He was trying to earn him. Slowly, patiently, painfully, he began showing up, not as a billionaire, but as a father trying to learn. He attended Ethan's school football games and sat quietly in the back row of the bleachers. No security team, no cameras, just him. Sometimes Ethan noticed. Sometimes he didn't. Daniel didn't push. He waited. He apologized, not in grand speeches, not with dramatic gestures, but in honest, simple words. I should have been there. I'm sorry for the years I missed. I can't change the past, but I want to change the future. And then he did something even harder than apologizing. He listened, really listened. He learned Ethan loved engineering. He learned he struggled with math in 8th grade. He learned he had once won a regional science fair, and no one from his family had been there to see it. Each detail felt like discovering chapters of a book he should have read years ago. Months passed. Trust didn't return overnight. There were awkward conversations, silent dinners, moments when Ethan's walls went back up. But Daniel didn't walk away. He stayed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Ethan's old bicycle chain snapped in the driveway. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed a toolbox from his garage and walked over. They worked side by side in silence at first. Grease stained Daniel's expensive watch. For once, he didn't care. After a while, Ethan spoke quietly, not looking up. "You're really trying, aren't you?" Daniel paused, tightening a bolt. He swallowed. "With everything I have." There was no business strategy behind those words. No negotiation, just truth. Ethan hesitated. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, he reached into the toolbox, picked up a wrench, and handed it to Daniel. "Okay, Dad." That single word echoed louder than any applause Daniel had ever received in a boardroom. "Dad, Not sir. Not Mr. Whitmore. Dad. In that moment, Daniel understood something profound. The empire he thought was falling apart had actually revealed what mattered most. Success without family is empty. Power without love is fragile. And sometimes, the secret that destroys your world is the same secret that saves your soul.